go. They're going to go quickie. Step back.
She's there again.
Let's go!
Hannah Chrisp gets a second try of the drop-off. So it was a much closer game.
Hannah Chrisp is through.
Oh!
There's that speed from Chrisp. There's that left to right.
Things. And now there's space again.
Not let Scotland score in this yet because the defence has been so much. What should we doing today?
It's a tour away with all your really good friends, and it's to Dubai, a nice hot place in December, which is always nice to get away. So it was a huge goal for mine. I wanted to play Dubai Sevens, and when I decided that's what I wanted to do, I then worked my way backwards to say, if I want to play Dubai Sevens, that's my goal for this season, how do I make that happen?
So, Hannah, thanks for taking the time to have a chat today. What I wanted to have a chat about was the similarities with sports coaching and the similarities we see within Kanban coaching. So a lot of the work I'll do with teams, there's a big crossover. And I think it's fair to say you've played a couple of sports now at definitely the elite level. Don't want to make you blush. And obviously, you know, with the athletic side of things, captain of the Bucks team, the winning the Bucks competition. So British University's athletics side of things. So it's fair to say you've experienced a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about. So what I wanted to get was your take on it from a sports side of things and how we can also see that and how it's beneficial for people within the workplace. Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. So let's start off with one thing that I see quite often, especially in the workplace, is we have this plan. And a lot of the time, especially in the workplace, we want a definitive plan of it's going to exactly go that way. And if not, you're tracking reds, and we need some kind of change meeting, and it's all gone to hell and back. And a lot of the time, that goal is probably either not well thought through enough, and the plan that's leading up to it, a lot of the time, from what I see, is a lot of happy path planning. How do you cope with that and negate that within the sort of sporting world, if you like?
Yeah, so I suppose the way I see goals, and everyone has different words for what they mean. You've got KPIs, you've got targets, goals. Everyone has a different wording, but so the words I use are goals and targets. And when I separate that out, I have long-term goals and short-term targets to help me achieve those goals. My short-term targets tend to be a lot more measurable, and they're targets because if I don't achieve that target, it's not necessarily a failure, but we just have to realign I have to realign my path to still hit that target, but maybe on a different time frame or coming at it from a different angle. So I would have a long-term goal, which can be anything from this season, for example. My goal was to play Dubai Sevens. It's the Dubai Rugby Sevens is one of the biggest sevens tournaments in the world. It's known in the sport as, from a rugby sense, it's very competitive, it's high level, it's a really great experience on the rugby side, but it's also, from a social experience, brilliant, right? It's a tour away with all your really good friends, and it's to Dubai, a nice hot place in December, which is always nice to get away. So it was a huge goal for mine. I wanted to play Dubai Sevens, and when I decided that's what I wanted to do, I then worked my way backwards to say, if I want to play Dubai Sevens, that's my goal for this season, how do I make that happen? And from that, I set a series of smaller mini targets, each one working back from my end goal, which was to play in Dubai Sevens. So in order to play in Dubai Sevens, I have to be selected by a team going to Dubai Sevens. That's my end target, the last target on the list. In order to get selected to play for a team going to Dubai Sevens, I have to have played for that team before. They have to know who I am. They have to have seen me, have confidence in me. The coaches have to like me. I have to have trained hard. So the next target backwards is get in with a team who are going to Dubai Sevens. from that point on, how do I get into that team? Well, I have to have been recognised by them. A team that is going to Dubai Sevens has to recognise me in order to pick me. How do I get recognised? My next target back from that is to play in a tournament where a team that was going to Dubai Sevens is also playing in. So the coaches see me, the players see me. It's less, and realise that none of this along the way is if I don't do it at this time, at this date, the whole thing falls apart. But they're movable targets. I just have to do all these things in a certain order to get to the end. So I worked my way back, and the first step, the very end target, the first target in the list was I have to play in a social tournament that's probably below my standard in order to get picked up by a team that are going to play sevens in tournaments within Scotland to allow the rest of things to happen. So then I kind of put myself out there, spoke to some coaches, some players, and said, look, I'm keen to get into sevens this summer. How do I do that? Ask certain people around, and I got picked up by someone for the first social tournament. And everything that has happened since then has been following the next target. You know exactly what it is. Once I've done that one, cool. What's my next target? Done that one. What's my next target? And I am going to Dubai Sevens in December.
Magic. Superb.
So it's just about having a really clear path, but recognizing that path isn't a case or a series of successes and failures. It's about a constantly adapting path. If I had failed at one stage, so I got into the squad. I got into the original squad that I knew were going to Dubai Sevens. I played a couple of tournaments for them, but I did all of this after they had selected their team for Dubai Sevens. Does that mean you give up? No, it means you keep going down to training, you keep putting the work in, you keep making the connections, impressing people around you, working hard. They had an injury, somebody's pulled out, and they've pulled me in because I did all the right things. I followed my process up to that point, which put me in the best possible position to then, when the opportunity arises, I'm the next best option. I'm the person that they want to pull in because of all of the stuff I've done before.
Yeah. So it's having that goal and the plan, but having the faith in there to be able to adjust the more you learn, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
if at some point, I don't know, let's say for instance, you got to a tournament and maybe injured yourself, you'd have to adjust that timeline now to counter for that injury. Yeah. And then, what can still get me there because I know I can get there. Exactly. So no, that's brilliant. That's great because a lot of the time I see people look at that plan and the failure as black and white, or they just keep pushing the target out, rather than pushing the target out. What can you do in the middle to readjust? And I think that is such an important piece for success. Without it, you're just going to bang your head against a brick wall quite often. Right?
Yeah. And for me, it's never really. I think there's a lot of shame, and I felt this in my corporate life and in my sporting life as well. But when you don't meet a target, just because you haven't met a target doesn't mean you haven't learned something. You haven't improved in the interim. Doesn't mean you haven't become a better player as a result of all of the steps that you've taken. It just means that target has to now change or adapt in order for you to still meet the end goal. And it shouldn't be a case of giving up. It's just saying, okay, it didn't quite go to plan, but what have I learned and how have I gotten better to now make the next target easier to achieve or shorter time frame or whatever it needs to be. The goal doesn't change. The targets just have to adapt, and there's no shame in not hitting a target as long as you recognize what it is that you've learned and how you've changed as a result of the work you put in to get close to the target.
Awesome. So one of the other things I want to kind of speak about, and I think a lot of time people don't see this as much in the working environment as they probably should, and it's that practice. It's that continuous sort of practice to build the capability, just putting the hard yards in, putting the reps in to be able to do something, subconsciously better, quicker, faster. So can you kind of give us an example of how you've had to do that in the sort of sporting world?
I think it is so prominent in sport is the theory that practice makes perfect, right? And for me, practice doesn't make perfect, but practice makes you 100 times less likely to make a mistake or make an error. And the more times you do something, the more kind of second nature. Your subconscious does it for you. So I, the season just gone, went to spend 5 months in Australia. So I play touch rugby is one of my sports. I've played in Europe for 11 years before this point. That's 12 years now, but I went to spend a season in Australia playing. And I had never experienced fundamentally what was a completely different way of doing something. They play the same game, you're doing the same thing, but the way that they do it is completely different. It's just they're a lot more advanced in their skills and capacities, understanding, game awareness. And we have a defensive structure that is very traditional in Europe. It's something that a lot of countries in Europe will play and do the same thing. So if A happens, you do this. If B happens, you do that. Is how we play in Europe. And in Australia, they have, if A happens, you could do A or B. If B happens, you could do B, C, D, or E. They give you a lot more responsibility in decision making down there because the level of kind of game awareness and game understanding is so much higher. So I went knowing A and B, and they expected me to know C, D, E, and F as well. And it was like a whole new world was opened up. And it was incredible because I had to almost unlearn something I'd spent 11 years doing that was 100% second nature already. And I had to retrain myself, not only to do A and B differently, but also to learn D, E, and F, and C. I forgot C. But it was the only way I was going to get this, to untrain myself from what I had been doing to do this new thing, was repetition. So we were training 4 or 5 times a week as a squad. But I recognized that my base level knowledge was below that of everybody else for this structure. So the coach, I mean, thankfully to him, because he was the one that made this happen, my coach did an extra session with me every single week for 9 weeks. So it's 9 hours extra work of just going rep after rep after rep of them saying, if this is a situation, how do I react? If this is a situation, how do I react? Just to give me practice, because I was below everyone else. I had to get myself up to that standard in order to perform and be a strong member of that team. So it was just hours and hours of extra work. And it's really, you have to engage that part of your brain that says, this is a sadistic kind of fun. Like, I know this isn't enjoyable. I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again. But the feeling that you get when you're playing a game at that tournament in the end of it, and I make the right decision time after time after time on the field, makes all of that pain worth it, because you've put in the hours and you see the success at the end. And not all of it can or should or has to be fun. There's an element of it that just says, if you want to be better, you have to put the time in.
You've got to go through this, yeah. I was going to say, within the Kanban side of things, one of the general practices is around policies. And as I said, within Europe, you had the policy is, if A happens, then you do this. If B happens, then you do that. Whereas in Australia, it's a bit more evolved. So they would have had a different set of policies that you had to learn. And it's the same for anyone coming into a new team, in that what's worked for you in the past elsewhere might not cut it in a different team. So you've got to evolve, and that practice, that continuous exercise to build that capability, that is learning those policies and executing them under pressure.
The real value, as you were saying there, is when you come into a team, quite often, if it's a new job, or for me, it was going to a new touch team. As I said at the beginning, your output is the same. At the end of the day, I'm still playing touch. The game is the same. The goal is the same. We're trying to score more than the other team. We want to win medals. Corporate environment, your team is trying to achieve the same thing. You're trying to build wind farms, sell mortgages, whatever it might be. But how you go about it doesn't always have to be the same. And the value that you can gain from going to a new team is bringing experience from where you've been and trying to improve that process. So there was elements as well where I had to learn their way of doing things, but equally I had experience. It was, again, we play a completely different game to them, and I to challenge things the way they didn't. Say, okay, I understand how the way you do it, why you do it this way. This is how we do it. Is there anything I can bring that is going to add to your processes and change and adapt your processes
definitely.
too? So there is an element of real hard graft just to learn their way, but equally you should always be looking for continuous improvement and opportunities to do things differently.
That continuous improvement is something, again, within the Kanban method that we look at quite a lot. And I think we'll come back to that through some of the other stuff that we cover now. So one of the things I wanted to kind of speak about was, because you mentioned there about putting the hard yards in, how do you then insert variety in case you just plateau? Because you're doing something over and over and over. You get good at it, you can do it. You can do it with your eyes closed, that's fine. How do you then insert the variety to make sure you don't end up on this false summit plateau side of things?
When I was younger, so I did athletics for the first, 23 years of my life, and compete. And I did sprinting. And a lot of people say, how do you get any enjoyment of like running the same 100-meter stretch over and over and over again? Which it is true when you think about it in the cold light of day as an athlete, especially in someone who's doing athletics. You've got a 400-meter track, the view doesn't change. And quite often people say, I went out for a nice 5K run. I would never just do that lap after lap after lap. That sounds like my idea of hell. But it's the variety in what you do day in, day out. So going down to the track and doing a training session where you run 8 100-meter sprints 4 times a week, 52 weeks a year, would be so dull. But it's about breaking it down and working on different elements of that. So within a 100-meter race, yes, you're running 100 meters. Again, the output is the same, but you break it down and say, okay, I want to improve on my acceleration, or I want to improve on my speed endurance. So you look at different elements of the session. So one session a week, we might do work on acceleration, and you do work over a really short distance, so 20 or 30 meters, and you would have someone in front of you who you're chasing. So you insert this element of competition and excitement, and there's an element of winning each time you do it. Or you would do like a speed endurance session where you train at 150 meters instead of 100. So you're working on your ability to maintain that speed for a longer period of time. Or plyometrics. So if you want to work on your fast twitch muscles, you could do like skipping and bounding and working on that kind of explosive power off the ground. Or if you want to improve your leg speed, you'd go and sit on a bike and spin your legs as fast as possible. So you do a bike session instead. So there's a way of, again, the output, the target is the same, but you're looking at breaking it down and saying, how can I make this more interesting than just running 100 meters over and over again? Because again, not only does your mind get bored, but your body says, I know how to do this. That's not that exciting anymore. Yeah. And it itself becomes complacent. There's so many studies in sport that say if you do the same thing over and over again, you will stop getting better. You will actually start not improving anymore, because you can't. If you're wanting to train for a 5K and go and do a park run, just running 5K over and over again isn't, I mean, to an extent, isn't going to make you better. You need to vary it up and do interval training or run a 10K one day instead. It's just...
when you say you're going to hit that plateau, that is something that I see quite a lot with teams. They go on this journey and they come together as a team. They work out, actually there's too much work in our system, so we'll take some out. They evolve some policies and they think, do you know what, this is cool, I like it. And then they just check out there. And you're like, there's so much more low-hanging fruit there. You've just got to push yourself into it. And without that variety of changing stuff up and getting things different, they don't see or go after that. And one of the things that, we want teams to do a lot of the time is inspect their own system and look at it. A lot of the time we'll get teams to get together for, a retrospective, or when they're speaking to their customers with customer reviews, service level reviews, stuff like that. Those chances to inspect and think, actually, if we just change that up a bit, would that give us a chance? That's something I don't see teams take enough advantage of. And suppose the same in sport, right? The ones who don't take advantage, they're quite good, but they don't win the tournament. They don't go to that next level. We were talking there about, with a 100-meter runner, if you just went out and did, 100 meters, 100 meters, 100 meters, you might improve, but it's not going to be significant. Whereas if you can get that 1% better at the, acceleration, 1% better at the speed endurance, talk to me about sort of, that compounding side of things, so that super compensation side of things, that the training and so forth, what it gives you. So how would you kind of measure that one?
As an athlete, I've had to learn over the course of my life, really, is that actually consistency is more beneficial. Consistent small improvement is more beneficial than one-off big jumps that happen every now and again. And I really felt this actually during COVID, when the structure of my week was completely taken away. So my entire life, from the age of about 8, I think I've been involved in elite competitive sport, and I've had set trainings that I have to go to, set things I have to do on set days, and I don't know a life without it, which some people think is awful. I can't think of anything worse, but it's just what I know, and it's what I love and enjoy. But COVID hit, and all of that was ripped away from me. There was no team training, there was no set times that you had to be anywhere or do anything, and that really unsettled me at the beginning. And I would, because there was no structure, I'd go a couple of days where normally I train 6 out of 7 days in a week. And it's just very consistent. I know exactly what I'm doing, what days. During COVID, I'd say, well, I don't really have to do anything today. There's no tournaments in sight. Nothing's coming up. I'm not working towards anything. All of a sudden, your kind of perspective on things changes. So I said, I don't have to do anything today. All right, I won't bother. Maybe I'll go for a nice walk, just, my allocated half hour a day out the house. And then the next day I'd say, well, I still don't have to work for anything. I'm not targeting anything. No one's going to know if I don't train. So I didn't do anything. And then by day 3, I feel guilty for not doing anything those 2 days. And I'd absolutely beast myself in a circuit session in the garden, and I'll also go for my allocated half hour outside and go for a run and do some really hard session. I'm then ruined for 3 days. So I think I've done a load of really good work over one day because I felt bad about the other 2 days, where if I had just kept going and said, right, I'm going to keep my structure in place. 6 days a week, I'm going to do something. And it is going to be replicate as far as possible the kind of levels of training I was doing, keep it consistent. At no point is it the roller coaster like this, but it's just like this.
Yeah.
It just keeps going, and you keep improving and you keep improving, but it's very steady and it's very consistent. And in order to do that, I had to set myself some non-negotiables for every day. So I said, for every week. So I said, in this week, I'm going to train 6 times this week. I'm also going to get out and do a nice leisurely walk just to make the most of the day, the fresh air and the sunlight. But you have to set yourself non-negotiables that keep you consistent and just improving very steadily over a longer period of time. Because the 20% hike and the 40% crash is worse for you in the long run than really steady, consistent 1% improvement. But the statistic is like, if you get 1% better every day for a year, you're 30% better than you were at the beginning.
37 times better. Yeah. So it sounds crazy, but yeah, it's about that compounding interest going on every time, right? While we were talking about, that 1%, increase and so forth, one of the things we look at within evolving the maturity of teams, so something that we work with with the Kanban method is Kanban maturity model. So we can, look at organizations as a whole, or we can look at departments, depending on what lens you want to look at it. And if we want to evolve the maturity of the team, we've got this menu of options that we can introduce. And some of them are, stresses to get them to transition from, a maturity level of 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and so forth. Some of the stresses we might introduce, to a team to say, look, we can see that there's a lot of work in your system at the moment. So how about just for the next sort of, month or so, we just test it out just to see what it's like, or maybe do it over 2 weeks, where everyone will only work on one thing at a time. So at any time, if there's 5 of us in the team, there's no more than 5 things in our system. And if anything else is coming in, we've got to finish one before, we're going to bring that other one on, just to kind of get used to that, lowering the work in progress in the system. Because ultimately we probably want to lower it to probably less than what's in the team, so it starts to flow through and we start having capacity for some other things to do. How do you apply those stresses in the sporting environment, and how does that help you evolve in that environment?
It's incredibly common in sport, just across the board. It's one of the best ways to start improving as a team. Especially, and it is probably more prominent in team sports in the context that we're talking about here, where you can do it from very small scale. So looking at in training, you say, we're going to run a drill, and in this specific drill, you have to, only certain people can score. So whatever happens, you're running a rugby drill and you're trying to win, but only these people on your team, you allocate 2 out of 12 who are allowed to score. You then have to think about the way you do things and change your actions to get the result that you need. And we had it in a tournament, and we played a tournament as quite a high level competitive rugby team against a very social team a couple of weeks ago. And
was this early round? I take
right
it when
beginning,
you're in the pool stage.
First game of the day, all the teams are just kind of shoved into groups, and you play against teams that are as competitive as you or are more social in their standard before you then get ranked into top tier, middle tier, bottom tier. And we played against a team who are very social, and they said at the beginning, we're a very social team, we're just here to have a nice day, let's just enjoy this. We said, absolutely, that's absolutely fine. But we knew that we were going to come up against teams who were incredibly competitive in the later rounds of the tournament. So for us, I think we had scored like 3 or 4 tries in the first 5 minutes. And as a team, we don't gain anything from that. You don't get a chance to practice any of your processes. You're not using any skill. It's not enjoyable for anyone, really.
No, both sides definitely not. No.
So we kind of said, well, let's put some of these stresses on ourselves to force us to practice our processes, because then when we come up against the teams in the later stages, we're practiced, we're ready, I've had a chance to run through what we want to run through, and it's beneficial for us as a team. So you apply these stresses, and we said, look, we have to make 4 passes as a team before we score any tries, and to kind of get away from somebody with the ball just running through people, breaking tackles and just going themselves, because that benefits that one person. But in playing sevens, there's 13 other people on the field which have got nothing out of that. So yeah, it was really interesting to see, and it was good for us. We definitely felt the benefit of it in the later rounds of the tournament when we'd practiced our processes and been really strict with ourselves to make those 4 passes before we're allowed to score and have everybody involved in the game.
And as you say, as you're playing in a competitive team against a team that isn't so competitive, the option of just running clean through the middle is on. If you're playing a competitive team, you're not breaking that tackle. You're probably turning over the ball now. So moving it out wide is a smart thing to do. And by putting that stressor in, that's really helping your evolution to be able to compete later on, as opposed to let's just take a quick win now, which isn't always the right thing to do. So, no, that's brilliant. One of the things, we've spoken about there about applying stresses. How do you, one of the things I'm thinking about is we want to apply those stresses and we want to, challenge people enough to excite them, but not so much where, right, only Hannah can score and only Hannah can touch the ball. You're going to say, I'm going to be dead after 2 minutes here. You know what I mean? I'm out. There's no point in doing that, right? So how do we make sure we challenge people just enough to get them excited, but not to overwhelm them? And, I think about this with teams, a lot of the time they're given, this big regulatory compliance thing, right? You've got to go away, understand that and implement it. And half the time it's not even thought through. The regulator hasn't really thought it through. And we're being told these big things. How can we challenge people enough to get them excited, but not enough to overwhelm them where they think, I'm out, that's too much for me, I'm gone?
When I stopped doing athletics, I moved to playing touch rugby, which is a minimal contact form of rugby. I wasn't sure I was at 5'3", 58 kilos designed for contact rugby, so I thought I'd ease my way in to begin with. And I started playing touch rugby, and it was great for me coming from athletics. It's a very fast game. It was quite free, there's a lot of space. It's a perfect transition, in theory, into rugby. One of the girls I played touch with at the time, I was maybe 4 or 5 years into playing touch, said, "You've got great skills, you're really quick. I think you'd really enjoy playing rugby sevens, the contact form of the game." And I said, "Yeah, why not? Let's give it a try. I'm always, give it a shot, see how it goes. Nothing to lose." So she spoke to her coach, didn't really tell me what she was doing, but she actually spoke to her coach, who was the Scotland women's sevens coach at the time. And he said, "Yeah, bring her along to the next session, and we'll get her involved." So I went down, and the first time I ever played rugby was at a international squad session for Scotland Sevens. And I was so out of my depth. I had never played any form of contact rugby before. My skills, my passing and catching from playing touch were great, and my fitness from athletics and touch were great. But I really had no idea about the game. I'd watched a lot of rugby. My dad was a referee. I've grown up around the game, but it's very different watching it to actually playing it. I didn't know where I was supposed to stand, what I was supposed to do, and being around. I think as well, the other thing was being around for my very first experience. People who had played the game for years and years and years and were the most talented people in the country at that sport meant I felt completely overwhelmed. I didn't feel like I was in the right place. I got horribly bad imposter syndrome. I felt like I was doing everything wrong all the time because I didn't know where I was supposed to be. And it was incredibly overwhelming. Had I gone into a club team first, who could have supported me through that learning process, and then gone to a national squad session, things would have been a lot different in my view. I would have felt a lot more confident in my ability and my right to be there is the wrong word, but I think you know what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, it didn't feel like you earned it because you're coming straight into it, right?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I am a stubborn, headstrong, resilient person, and I battled through 3 years of Scottish rugby and got over my imposter syndrome and fears and everything. And I ultimately played a couple of sevens games for Scotland, which was brilliant. But it's a very overwhelming environment to go into, and I think there's levels of applying that stressor at the right time, giving me the experience of playing rugby first, understanding the game, developing the necessary skills, and then putting that stressor of playing with the most talented people in the country and competing with them would have been the right time to do that. I think or would have been a better time to do that, in my view. Yeah. And not meaning I didn't feel so overwhelmed and out of my depth.
Yeah. And I think, you know what I mean, as you mentioned there, your personality is, you're quite strong-minded, strong-willed, I think is maybe a nice way to put it. But yeah, so that was able to, whereas a lot of other people would have just said, "Nah, I'm out, I quit, it's just too hard, I'm gone."
I think that's the more common response in people. I think it's also the more the better response maybe is to say, "This is too much for me right now, but I will step away." And knowing when to step away, I probably stepped away earlier and said, "I don't know what I'm doing, I'll come back to you in 6 months." But I think there is definitely a good way to do it. And don't get me wrong, I was supported and people were very helpful and friendly, but it's personally, it was a very overwhelming experience, feeling completely out of my depth.
And that's something I've got to be aware of as a coach in the workplace. I see teams making, these evolutionary gains, and I'm thinking, oh, brilliant, cool. And now I want them to. And now if we start to think about this, and I've got to hold myself back quite often because I can see the promise within the team. So I'm seeing this person take something and run with it. I'm thinking, great. Just leave them run with it a bit longer so they're used to it. And that starts to become, second nature, and then go in before you start overloading them with new information to a point where they just say, do you know what? I'm all Kanban out now, mate. Whereas I want them to keep being excited about, okay, yeah, we can see how that's going to help us. Yeah, let's go with it. Let's go with it. So yeah, that's definitely something there. Hannah, listen, thanks for your time. It's been really, really beneficial for me, and hopefully for if anyone does ever watch this, hopefully it'll be beneficial for them as well. And if you want to follow Hannah on any of her socials, we'll flash them up on a card now, and check it out there. Thanks everyone, thanks for your time, thanks Hannah, and speak to you soon.
Thank you.
There's that speed from Chrisp. There's that left to right.
Once again, she's directing things. And now this space again. Oh.
Not let Scotland score in this set because the defence has been so. Watch me jinx it. But as Scotland scoop through. Oh, and I have jinxed it, haven't.
She might pick up. They're going to go quickie. Step back.
She's there again.
Go!
Hannah Chrisp gets a second try of the drop off. So it was a much closer.
Hannah Chrisp is through.